本当に回り道だった。本当に、本当に。
In the world of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, there's a scientific, or dare I say, supernatural event known as the spin. The spin is a phenomenon that occurs when a spherical object rotates at a certain speed. However, it isn't some neat party trick. The spin has a variety of other functions. For example, the Zeppeli family uses the spin for the art of execution, as it can relax a prisoner's body right before the moment of death. In fact, the spin is often used to manipulate the very function of the human body, causing it to unnaturally move in different directions, harden skin to a point where it deflects bullets, or flatten certain body parts. The rotation can also generate a new energy force called rotational energy, which is usually imbued into perfectly spherical objects like steel balls. However, as it turns out, steel balls and executions aren't the only thing the spin is good for. It's also an incredible medium for the development and growth of stand abilities. There are two stands in particular who massively benefit from the spin: Tazcag 4 and Soft and Wet Go Beyond. However, their spins are different in terms of their origins and their functions, so I decided to pit both versions of the spin and the stands they belong to against each other to truly see who'd come out on top. This isn't simply a versus video between stands, but also a question on which version of the spin is better, the golden spin or the explosive spin. Now, I know I made this video in the past, but it was badly researched, short, and got age restricted. So, think of this video as a superior remake.
Go fuck yourself, man. Think you're better than me.
I am better than you.
You're an ignorant fuck.
Anyways, with that out of the way, let's begin the video. Tusk comes in 4 acts: Tazcag 1, Tazcag 2, Tazcag 3, and Tazcag 4. Each act expands upon the previous one's abilities in major ways and scales with Johnny's understanding of himself and the spin. Tazcag 1 is the most basic form of the stand. To put it simply, it allows Johnny to imbue rotational energy into his fingernails, which then causes them to spin. Afterwards, Johnny can fire out his fingernails like the bullet of a gun in rapid succession. Even his toenails can be used. However, each nail bullet packs more power than your average firearm, as it can easily send people flying several meters into the air, sever limbs, and break rock. Johnny can choose to keep these nails spinning on his fingers, which allows him to use them as sharp melee weapons or makeshift wheels that help him move around. Once they are fired out, each nail bullet takes a few minutes before they grow back, which then allows Johnny to fire them out again. But this is unfortunately all there is to Act 1, a literal finger gun that's slightly more powerful than a handgun. However, this would soon change once Johnny learned about the Golden Rectangle. The Golden Rectangle, as the name implies, is a rectangle, but not just any random rectangle. As the first part of the name hints, the Golden Rectangle represents the gold standard for creating perfect structures in art, architecture, or nature. Almost everything abides by the Golden Rectangle, including the Great Pyramids, Statue of Liberty, Easter Island statues, bears, JoJo YouTubers. You get the idea. Whether intentional or unintentional, every artist or architect follows the Golden Rectangle for their creations. But it seems this isn't the only thing it can be used for, as the Golden Rectangle can also be used as a reference point to create a perfect spin, since in order for the steel balls to be perfectly spherical and spin in a perfectly round motion, they need to follow the golden standard of the Golden Rectangle. Since it can be found on almost anything, Gyro uses it as a reference point to create the perfect rotation of his steel balls, which can also be referred to as the golden spin. However, since Johnny's fingernails also rotate thanks to Tazcag 1, it happens to be the perfect medium for the Golden Rectangle, and thus the Golden Spin. So when Johnny uses the reference point of the Golden Rectangle, he in turn imbues the Golden Spin into his fingernails, which creates Tazcag 2. Act 2 has 2 benefits and 1 drawback, compared to Act 1. The first benefit is that the nail bullets are much more powerful, causing many times more damage than before. The second benefit is in fact its most dangerous trait. When the nail bullets of Act 2 pierce an object, they leave behind a bullet hole. However, these aren't any ordinary bullet holes. They are in fact holes in the fabric of space and time itself, as not even Funny Valentine could transport them to another dimension. What makes these bullet holes so dangerous is that they have the ability to pursue Johnny's enemies, meaning that once the initial bullets miss, the holes left behind will immediately home in on a target and chase them. They'll scale over and pass through any obstacle on their way. Once the bullet holes land on a target, they'll leave behind a bullet hole on the object or person, which causes the individual to take damage in a particular spot the hole landed on. The bullet holes also make their way to a person's heart. To put it simply, wherever the bullet holes end up, the object or person will take damage as if they were shot there. So not only will opponents have to worry about the initial bullet, but also the holes they leave behind. However, there is one drawback with Act 2, and that is that Johnny cannot rapid fire them like Act 1, being forced to shoot one at a time, which puts him at a huge disadvantage. But they also grow back much slower than Act 1. But I want you to remember the bullet holes, because they become instrumental to the next phase of Johnny's stand, Tusk Act 3. After a chance encounter with Jesus Christ, the prophet convinces him to shoot himself with his own nail bullets. However, this didn't cause Johnny to instantly perish. Instead, Johnny gained the ability to enter the bullet holes created by Act 2. Like I said earlier, the bullet holes are rips in the fabric of space and time, but what happened to the original bullet that pierced the object? Well, now you have your answer. This is an infinite point in space that the nail bullets infinitely spiral into, and this is the place Johnny goes into when he activates Act 3. When Johnny enters these holes, he's able to move around anywhere on a battlefield instantaneously. He prefers to move his limbs to different spots on a battlefield in order to surprise attack his opponents or achieve more strategic attack positions. Only Johnny's allowed to enter or manipulate these holes, as any other person or object that attempts to enter them or even touch them will be ripped to shreds, making Johnny almost invincible when within the holes. But even after 3 acts, Tusk has yet to reach his true form, a form that can only be achieved with infinite rotational energy. You see, there exists a form of the spin that can bypass any form of defense through a variety of means. This spin can only be achieved through the movement of a horse running in its natural state like it would in the wild, because unlike the usual methods of analyzing the golden rectangle through mostly static objects found in nature, this time the horse's running will generate kinetic energy on top of creating the golden rectangle. When the golden rectangle is finally created, after a little while, Johnny and Gyro will transfer the horse's kinetic energy to their steel balls or nail bullets, which then generates infinite rotational energy. For Gyro, this process created Ballbreaker, a stand which seems to have the power to accelerate time on living things, basically like a mini Made in Heaven. But for Johnny Joestar, the infinite rotational energy creates Tusk Act 4 is a long-range power stand that is made out of infinite gravity. This infinite gravity doesn't mean that the stand has infinite strength or speed, but something far more deadly. When Tusk Act 4 makes contact with an opponent, it can transfer its infinite gravity onto them. When this occurs, they'll begin to experience an infinite spin on their bodies. Every inch of their bodies, including their very atoms, will begin spinning rapidly. In this state, it's impossible for them to escape its effects, or do anything for that matter, as the infinite spin will never stop, even if they were to die. Any object that can aid them in their escape will be torn to pieces, as the spin can be transferred onto anything they touch. Sometimes an individual won't even experience the infinite spin, as they'll immediately be disintegrated in one touch. Act 4 is technically a close-range power stand, but also functions like a long-range stand as well, as the stand will move in the direction of the nail bullet. It can even hide within the bullet holes, making it incredibly difficult to escape it. The worst part about the stand is the unstoppable nature of it. The stand, like I mentioned earlier, is made out of infinite gravity, the force which governs most stand abilities in the series, and even the concept of fate. Funny Valentine with D4C Love Train seemed initially unstoppable. Any attack that made contact with golden light would immediately be redirected to a random point in space and time as a calamity, so no matter how powerful you were or how strong your attack was, once it made contact with Love Train, its damage would be reflected to someone else. However, Tusk Act 4 said okay, and proceeded to grab and slowly tear apart Love Train's defensive light, until eventually it pummeled Valentine into oblivion. Another example is when Act 4 slowly began to adapt and move inside Diego's The World. If he gave it any more time, it's possible Act 4 will completely adapt to Time Stop, and at that point, there will be almost no one left in the world that could stop Johnny Joestar. Almost. Josuke Higashikata's stand is a bit of an anomaly because it's technically 2 stands in one, combined to create a strange hybrid. Josefumi Kujo's Soft and Wet, and Yoshikage Kira's Killer Queen. To really analyze what makes this stand any different, we have to analyze what Soft and Wet can even do. The stand has 2 abilities, Plunder and Storage. Storage is by far the most simple and straightforward aspect of the stand. It allows Josuke to store and move any object within them, whether big or small. He uses this ability to move certain objects, store objects for later, protect himself from certain attacks, or trap allies or enemies within them. Hell, even things you never think a bubble could carry can be stored. The bubbles themselves are useful as well, as Josuke can use them in a variety of ways. Plunder is the stand's signature ability. It gives Josuke the ability to steal the properties of any object. When the bubbles of Soft and Wet make contact with something like a wall, floor, body part, Josuke is able to steal an aspect of them, basically erasing them from that object for a short time. For example, he can steal sound from a wall, making it silent no matter what he does to it. He can steal friction from the ground, causing those walking on it to slip uncontrollably. He can steal temperature from a room. He can steal eyesight, making someone blind. He can steal moisture from the human body, causing them to become extremely thirsty. You get the idea. Anything you can think of as tangible can be stolen, so there's theoretically no limit to what Josuke could plunder. He doesn't just steal the property. Josuke can also store the property and then release them later. He, for example, can store sound and then release that sound in a different room, which is a great way to trick his opponents. This aspect of the plunder ability has come in handy in a lot of situations, and because he can create multiple bubbles, he can store multiple properties at once. As you were listening to this, you probably wondered how Killer Queen contributes to any of this. Well, the most obvious answer would be the bubble's explosive pop, capable of sending objects within them flying at high speeds, damaging the body internally, or creating miniature mines that explode on contact. However, these explosions are incredibly weak, probably not any more powerful than a small firework. At most, they can lightly stun an opponent. However, there is one ability the stand possesses, which I believe resulted from Yoshikage Kira's fusion. I'm of course talking about Soft and Wet Go Beyond. To understand what I'm saying, we have to look back at who Josuke Higashikata truly is. Josuke is the product of an equivalent exchange between Josefumi and Yoshikage. Basically, parts of Kira's body were implanted onto Josuke's and replaced their originals, which is evident when you take a look at his eyes. Body parts aren't the only thing that can be swapped, as closer inspection of Soft and Wet's bubbles revealed that they are 2 separate bubbles grafted together, one belonging to Josefumi and Yoshikage. This also indicates that parts of Kira's soul mixed in with Josefumi's, since stands are a manifestation of your fighting spirit. The combining of Yoshikage and Josefumi's body and soul will create a new being entirely, Josuke Higashikata, and thus he'd inherit aspects of his predecessor's stand abilities, while still having his own unique aspects. Josuke gained the simple bubble generation ability of Josefumi. However, the ability to steal properties of any object is something unique to Josuke. However, the parts of Killer Queen that Soft and Wet would inherit would come in the form of the explosive spin. You see, Soft and Wet's bubbles aren't made up of what you think, like soap. The bubbles are in fact a thin line, a line that spins rapidly. It spins so fast that it generates a destructive force called an explosive spin, which cuts through and destroys anything it passes through. However, this isn't the bubble we should be paying attention to. We should instead be focusing on the bubble coming out of Josuke's birthmark, the Go Beyond bubble. This bubble also consists of a spinning line. However, unlike before, the lines are spinning so fast that the bubbles almost cease to exist and become partially invisible. You can notice this phenomenon occur on incredibly fast-moving objects, but you might be wondering what exactly is so special about this bubble. Well, because it technically doesn't exist, that also means it can't be influenced by phenomena that do exist in our world, like time, space, gravity, and calamity. You all know the Wonder View controls the law of calamity, which basically makes the very world protect it. He's like if Final Destination was a stand. However, since Go Beyond doesn't exist and ignores the laws of the world, it could ignore the concept of calamity and hit Wonder View. Go Beyond can ignore and travel through any law or structure, including walls, as will simply phase through them, and even cell signals. As it travels through a phone, its cell signal, and then through another phone, in mere seconds. However, because of its inherent ability to ignore anything, that means that Josuke is unable to control it, unlike its traditional soap bubbles. They'll go in any direction they please. When the bubbles of Go Beyond hit a target, they'll immediately be disintegrated, and they pack enough power to send an opponent flying several meters in the air. This is especially dangerous since the bubbles can phase into your organs and obliterate them from inside, so Josuke can not only plunder and store objects within his bubbles, but the bubbles can also ignore and pass through every concept and structure in the JoJo universe. So, after explaining both sides, which version of the spin is the most superior? Well, there's no real point in debating. The golden spin is slightly better than the explosive spin, and for one main reason, it's far more versatile and powerful. The golden spin can be applied to any object, not just Johnny's fingernails or Gyro's steel balls, and the golden spin can power up a stand several times, as Tusk went from a stand who can fire fingernails to one that can one-shot every character in the JoJo franchise. The biggest advantage of the explosive spin is its ability to ignore concepts, but at the same time, its inability to be controlled makes it inconvenient in battle. The golden spin has never let Johnny or Gyro down, and always comes in clutch to get them out of a sticky situation. Okay, but does this really matter in a theoretical fight between Johnny and Josuke? Well, let's see. For this confrontation, I'll be using this setup. Josuke or Gappy and Johnny will be placed on two opposite sides of a battle arena with a distance of 200 meters. Gappy's goal is to close the distance, while Johnny's goal is to defeat him before he closes in. At 200 meters, Johnny doesn't have to worry. We'll just assume he'll use Act 1 at this distance. He almost never does, but let's just pretend. Well, Act 1 will be incredibly easy for Gappy to avoid. Despite them being stronger than a handgun, at this distance the soap bubbles should be able to catch them and store them. Now that Johnny knows that Gappy won't be an easy foe to deal with, he'll automatically resort to using Tusk Act 2. Gappy will assume they work the same way as the nail bullets earlier and attempt to catch them again. However, Johnny will shoot at a lower angle to avoid this outcome, and in turn, the nail bullets will begin pursuing Gappy. Gappy will be kept at bay for quite a while, and it's likely he'll get hit once or twice. However, there is one thing Gappy has up his sleeve. He can use the plunder ability of Soft and Wet to remove the rotational energy from the bullets, which will in turn dissipate them. The rotational energy isn't too different from friction and sound. It's a tangible force that can interact with the world and be transferred to different mediums, so it's perfectly possible for Gappy to steal the rotational energy to form the holes and render them useless. Another 50 meters cleared. Johnny now may attempt to utilize Act 3 to shoot Gappy from several angles. This will take Gappy by surprise at first, especially since he has to be extremely cautious of his surroundings. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that he'll be defeated, since now that Gappy knows he can plunder the rotational energy, he'll surround himself on all sides as a protective shield, plundering the rotational energy of any bullet that comes near him. 50 additional meters cleared. At this distance, Gappy is now close enough with his bubbles, or take away the friction of the ground, causing him to slip. However, this won't be that useful, since Johnny's bullet holes act independently of him, even with no line of sight of his target. So Johnny could blindly fire into the ground, and they'd still pursue Gappy. However, since we've established that Gappy can steal the rotational energy, this strategy will be useless. And finally, Gappy has now closed the distance. With his immense hand-to-hand skills and the fact that Soft and Wet is a close-range brawler, Johnny would get jumped on two different sides, pummeled, and forced to have his senses constantly stolen, giving him no time to strategize. Victory is now assured. But you probably noticed something. I didn't once bring up Taskak 4. To be honest, I was trying to give Gappy as much of a fighting chance as possible, but things are pretty much over once Act 4 comes after him. Gappy would not be aware of the infinite rotation and would thus send Soft and Wet to engage Tusk in a stand barrage, and that's where things would end. Once Soft and Wet is touched, Gappy would undergo the infinite rotation and slowly perish to its effects. Victory is now assured for Johnny. Is what I like to say if the bubbles didn't just plunder the infinite rotation off of Johnny. Remember, the energy itself is implied to be a force which can be manipulated and transferred. So Gappy will remove the rotation from himself, store it within his bubble, and transfer the stored energy onto Johnny, causing him to spin instead. Gobion wouldn't really be that useful in this battle, since it cannot be controlled. However, in the off chance that Johnny attempts to escape inside the rotational dimension, the Gobion bubble will be able to travel inside. We've established that nobody but Johnny can enter this dimension, but since Gobion's bubbles ignore the laws of the world, they'd enter and hit Johnny, likely phasing inside him and erasing some of his internal organs. But again, this is heavily dependent on if Gobion's bubble fired in Johnny's general direction. In terms of which version of the spin is better, the golden spin easily takes the throne. In regards to which stand would win in a fight, it would be a very close fight, but Soft and Wet Gobion has enough tools in its arsenal to directly counter the infinite rotation and rotational energy of Johnny's nail bullets.